Hi there and welcome back to another episode at Station Road. Now today we're continuing on with this disused viaduct build and looking at the application of the brick textures. So you'll recall in the previous episode it was a case of assembling the laser cut components for this disused viaduct into its modular structures. Now today we're going to look at the brickwork application, but before we do that, as I was actually constructing the components, there were some modifications that came to light or came to hand at the time when I was building them that I thought I'd actually deal with at the time. So the initial design, which I will call prototype 1, was improved upon to develop a prototype 2, which just had some minor modifications to the actual design, so the assembly side of it is a little bit more straightforward. So we'll jump into that part first, and then that will lead on to the application of the brickwork textures. So what changes did I make to the initial prototype, which is this one here, which was obviously captured in the previous episode, and prototype number 2, which is this one sitting here. So taking a look at prototype 1, I had quite large slots for the end pieces. There was no slot here, so this sort of basically had to be mounted flush and placed in an accurate position, and I didn't have any bracing here, although I have actually added some individual pieces of MDF in between each of these supports for some bracing in this prototype 1. So if we take a look, the first thing we notice is that prototype 2, which is this one here, I've increased the surface area where the end of the arch components anchor to this end piece and only included a much shorter little wee slot here, which is really what all is needed to ensure that the vertical arches underneath here stay perpendicular. So you can clearly see the difference there. So the next component that I've added in the prototype 2 is a wee slot here for the road bed to anchor into and offer up as a guide when installing the road bed, and it just adds that little bit of strength, plus also getting this road bed nicely lined up. And finally, the last component that I've done is laser cut a component that runs through on these central pillar components here, and it slots in at the end. It's got a slot in each one of these as well, and it basically locks this whole area into place. So this is prototype 2, and I think we're pretty much there. The only other component that I have altered as well is I've actually brought the arch curve in a little bit. So originally the arch curve was actually where that notch is, just in here. So I've actually drawn that arch in a bit further, so when the faceplate goes on over this, there is less of a recess in there. And if we take a look at this example here now, where I've actually added in or curved some card into here, and the lip now is much less. Now when it comes to this component here, this is actually just a very thin bit of card. It's not very heavy because it needs to be able to bow and bend to the shape of this arch, but not to the point where you're bending and it starts to kink and crease, so hence the thinner card. Now the other thought that I had is, originally I thought maybe I apply the brickwork to the card and then put this in place, but I kind of feel like possibly it could actually start to crinkle and crease with the brick layer applied to this. So I've just put the card in as blank, and then I'll apply the brickwork to this. Now it probably will make the application a little bit trickier, but I think we're just going to end up with a much smoother brick surface as we wrap this into here. And of course I'll go through that process in this video, and we'll just find out how tricky, or hopefully easy, it will be to do that process. So the final components that I've also assembled are these components. Now as you can see, these are a little bit more bespoke, and as I mentioned, making this kit available for people to purchase, it won't include these components because these are very unique to my particular layout and to where this viaduct is actually going. So these are very bespoke, and they had to be assembled to get the right angles. So it was quite tricky too in actually working out, because of the angle of this end wall, the slots that the arch sections actually anchor into need to be wider. So you can see there, you sort of got a wider slot, because by the point you're actually running these components through, they're actually on an angle and creating that wider width. So what I actually did here is I actually had these arch components extending beyond the surface, and then once this was all set, I simply sliced them off with a craft knife and then just gave it a quick sand down in order to get a nice flush surface. And the same goes for this, because one of the things that you can't do on a laser cutter is actually cut material on an angle, as in like a bevel. You can't do that on a laser cutter, or at least you can't do it on my laser cutter. So that's one end piece, and then this is the other one. So this is actually a 2-arch section, and as you can see, I've trimmed off these components here, but as you can see, I haven't done these 2 edges here yet. So they're going to be sliced down with a craft knife and then sanded so that we get a nice flush smooth corner here. So the 2 angles are quite different, as you can see, so they're not the same, they're quite bespoke, and that is obviously to fit in where this viaduct is actually going to go on the layout. So what we'll do is we'll just jump into applying a little bit of the brickwork to one of the outer arch sections, and also to one of the columns or pylons as well. So we'll go through that process, and I'll do the rest of this obviously off camera and see how it goes. Right, so looking at the application of the brickwork, and we've got of course one outer section here, and I've already trimmed a section of this which is going to be applied to that, and then we've got a full sheet here of brickwork which of course is going to be applied to one of the columns or pylons. And I quickly made up one of these earlier, so that's a pylon that's been wrapped, so that's fully wrapped around. Now the curious thing is, the way I designed this, I just simply couldn't get this into a single A4 sheet, so this doesn't completely wrap around it. So there is a small piece of brickwork that is stitched on the back here, and you may be able to make out just a small seam running through here. I'm not too worried about that, because I'll make sure that the seam edge of this pylon is towards the back of the viaduct. So if I had an A3 printer, I wouldn't have come across this problem. And it brings me to another point too, and I think somebody commented about folk who live in the US, and of course you don't have A4 paper in the US. Well, you do, but it's hard to come by. And as a graphic designer, I actually do a lot of design work through the US, and it's nothing short of frustrating because of their bizarre paper sizes. So of course it's US letter, and then there's US legal. Now if you're able to print on US legal, you won't have any issues at all, because it's about the same width as an A4, but it's actually longer. So in regards to printing brickwork to wrap around this, you won't have any problems at all. So yeah, it's a case of having to print on US legal in the States because it is a longer paper size. So I also whipped together this one beforehand as well. So this is with the brickwork applied as per this arch here, and then of course it's wrapped around the back, and the excess of this strip here is then applied to the back of this, because this of course is going to be a part that protrudes up above the road bed. So we'll start with applying this arch brickwork to this component here, and it's exactly trimmed to the top edge. So I've got to butt join it right up to the edge, and I'll trim one edge off here and then apply this. Now I'm using spray glue for this, and I use the Scotch or 3M Super 77 spray glue, and this seems to be really good. It's probably one of the better spray glues, simply because the nozzle design, it sprays it in a kind of a wedge shape rather than just blurting it out in a big blobby mess. So I find this spray glue is actually really quite good. So I'll go and spray this on the back of this, and then we'll apply it to here. Now one of the things that we need, and I forgot about it, and I'm just going to reach over here and grab it, is a printer's roller. Now this is excellent for flattening out the brickwork once it's been applied to the substrate, so these come in real handy. Right, so that's a pylon now covered in the brickwork, and as you can see, I've just stitched in this piece here just to finish off that little bit. Unfortunately, the brickwork is not a perfect match here, but this is going to be on the back of the viaduct, and I may actually, I'm not too sure yet, I may actually add in a architectural feature where you've got an additional raised level of brickwork down here that's thinner. So there's a possibility of doing that, but I'm not too fussed about it. It's just the downside to the A4 print not quite reaching all the way around, and of course I've just trimmed that off a bit of the full sheet, and of course it's got plenty of bleed on it, so when this is dry I can then trim the excess off. So with the arch section, while there's still a reasonable amount of tack in the spray glue, what I'm going to do is trim out this excess, and we can actually wrap this brickwork around. So we're just going to cut through the end piece. There we have it. So you end up with a bit of a brick edge around the inside. So of course when this is actually anchored onto here in the final stage, of course that series of flaps around on the underside is actually going to be squashed or squeezed in between these two layers, which will pretty much secure it in place for good. So of course the next component I'm going to have a crack at is applying some brickwork to the underside of these arches, and this may or may not be an easy task. So before we get into the underside of the arches, we'll just attach this excess bit of brickwork, of course, that was trimmed off from the full sheet that we used to wrap the column. So we're just going to apply that there, and as I mentioned, it is the inside wall that protrudes up above the road bed. So for these smaller parts, I actually use the Yoo-hoo glue that comes in a stick, and it's actually a really good glue for applying smaller bits of brick texture, because you've got time to sort of slide it around on the surface and get it in exactly the right place. So we're just going to run some across there, and of course when it dries, it does actually dry pretty secure. So we're just going to line it up to the top edge and run that across there. Of course there's some excess out each end. Of course we will trim that off once it's dry. And that's the inside of the wall. So we'll let that dry, and we'll now get on to doing these arches. Now what I thought I'd do, because this part I'm pretty much winging it, is I thought I'd try two different methods. So one I'll do with some spray glue, and the other one I'll do with the Yoo-hoo glue stick, because I'm not quite sure how easy it is going to be to apply this brickwork into here. Now I've already pre-trimmed it all out so that it's an exact fit, so I'm not going to do any trimming afterwards, so it really does have to be lined up perfectly. So we'll start with the spray glue version and see how we go with that, and hopefully I don't make a big mess of it. Right, so that's the spray glue version in place, and it actually didn't go on too badly. The great thing about the 3M spray glue is you can slide it around just a little bit. You've got just a minute amount of time to just slide it into position before you press it down and it becomes a little bit too tacky. So I think that sort of went pretty well without any hitches. So we'll do another version, but we're going to use our glue stick, and we'll see how this goes. And this is just really determine what might really be the best method for doing this. Right, so that's the glue stick end, and I'm not quite sure whether that actually works as well, because I think I might have actually missed a little bit on that edge. It's sort of not sitting down right. I'd probably have to say I'm preferring the spray glue over the glue stick. I think maybe with the glue stick it's just simply too big an area to work, although it has gone down reasonably well, but there is just a little bit on that edge there that's not sitting down, and it's probably where I've missed applying the glue right to the edge. So let those dry, and I'm actually going to come back to this column that we've got here, and I had a thought. This is a piece of excess that has actually come off from the brickwork that was used for the underside of here, and what my thoughts are is I might actually just glue a whole new section of brickwork over the top of this, and then that gets rid of that seam. And then I've got a wee trick for doing the edges that eliminates that white paper edge. So we'll apply a chunk of this to here, and might actually just trim that excess off this first. So we'll get that excess off. Now I'll just show you with this here, in order to get that really fine white edge that's running along there, I just use a brown colour pencil. Now this is the Derwent colour pencils. These are great, and I think I've commented on them before so many times that they're just marvellous for card kits, getting rid of those edges. So just by running the pencil along that edge, the white paper edge is gone. So right, we will apply this brickwork to here, and that will eliminate that sort of seam. It's more prominent down this end, and it's just simply because my printer is not absolutely spot on. It's not going to print it exactly even tone all the way across the print. So we're just going to use a bit of the Yoo-hoo glue for this. So depending on how well this sort of works, in order to get rid of that join, simply because the A4 isn't quite big enough, is in a kit form of this, I'll probably actually create a individual brick component that goes on the end wall, and then when it comes to wrapping this around, it wraps around the two main sides and one end, and then you apply a bit of brickwork to the open end to finish it off, and then it's just a case of using a brick coloured colour pencil to run across the edge. So we're just going to let that dry, come back to it, trim off all the excess and run over those edges. Right, so we've finished covering all these components in the brickwork, and as you can see, I've now finished these columns or pylons, and you really can't tell where the edge is here now that the brown pencil has been run down the edges. And I think this side is the seam, so there's a bit of brown pencil that's been run down these edges here, and I think is at that edge there you can just faintly sort of see the brown pencil there as well, but it does create a nice crisp edge. So now that these are all complete, let's actually just temporarily pop this whole structure together and see how it looks. So these are quite a snug fit in here, and that simply plugs in over there. And of course, as you can imagine, the next unit that will be next to this will also slot in to this column. So that's that one there, and I might actually turn it up the other way now. So that's going to slot in there, and then we've got another column in here. So it's a nice tight fit for these components that fit in here. So I'll just move this forward a little bit. And then of course these components are going to sit resting on top of the columns here. So that's our sort of overall finish, and what I'm actually going to do is run a capping that's going to run around the top of the column. That was often commonly seen anyway, and that will be run around through there, so it will sort of eliminate the visual join that you might see through here. And then if we slot the other one on the other side, and you can of course see the brickwork that's now on the inside. So they're not going to stay there, but you can see how it's going to start to, whoops, take its appearance. So there we have it. That's as far as I've got at the moment. Of course, it's a pretty hot sunny day here in New Zealand, and it's about 35 degrees in the garage, so it was really starting to get just a little bit too hot in there. So that's the end of stage 2. So in between now and the next video, of course, I will apply brickwork to all the other components, and in stage 3 it will probably be a case of starting to do some of the more detailed areas. So we're talking about the capping stones that run around the top of the pillars, and then some other minor sort of detailing components. And then from there, which will probably be in stage 4, we'll actually look at the weathering of the entire viaduct, and that will then of course be finished off with another matte clear coat of spray to seal everything in. So I'll leave it there for today's video. I certainly hope you've gained some inspiration and ideas for your own layout, and maybe even you're gathering a little bit further interest in the possibility of purchasing one of these as a kit. So thanks for watching, everyone. Do take care, look after yourselves. Of course, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will catch you next time. Bye for now.